Speaking of employment, let's admit it, we tend to care more about the number of jobs created. Ask a politician for election or a project manager preparing an annual report on employment. Then comes who's getting the jobs. Women, men, people from rural areas, ethnic minorities, young people. The type of jobs seems to be an afterthought, despite many years of discussions. It's high time to address this misplaced priority. So for this episode, with me are Katharina Walker, who is a senior advisor on skills development at Helvetas. She has provided strategic and technical support to various projects in the Western Balkans, the Eastern Partnership region, and in Myanmar. Katharina has also substantial experience in backstopping thematic networks. Having worked at a German Chamber of Commerce in India, Katharina is highly experienced in engaging the private sector. In Switzerland, she carried out extensive policy-related research, as well as consultancies on vocational education and training and labor markets. Katharina, welcome back to the Inclusive Blog podcast. It's good to have you once again.
Thank you for the invitation, Sabine. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
And with me is also Stephen Hartridge, who is a project coordinator of the Systems Change Initiative, supporting the International Labour Organization and donor-funded projects to adopt a systemic approach to decent work. Steve has over 14 years of experience working in Africa, the Americas, Europe, and Asia Pacific as an engineer and market systems development professional in public, private, and multilateral organizations. He is specialized in the market systems approach to development, value chain development, private sector development, and monitoring and results measurement. Steve, thank you for being part of this episode.
Thanks very much for having me.
And with me is also Elvira Muedini, who is a manager of the Reselbinia project of the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, implemented by Helvetas, aimed at enhancing youth employment in Albania. The goal is to create better employment and income opportunities for young Albanians. Elvira has a vast experience in managing development projects, as well as working in the private sector. Elvira, thank you for joining.
Thank you for the invitation, Sabine. It's my pleasure to be with all of you.
To start with you, Katharina, can you tell us why are so many young people unemployed in the Western Balkans and the Eastern European region? Is it that there is an oversupply of certain skill profiles, and often the skills sought by employers are substantially undersupplied? Can you give us kind of like an overview?
Thank you, Sabine. Yes, you're spot on. Too often, the skills that young people have learned in school simply do not match what potential employers need. So often there would be job openings, but simply not enough people who have the right skills for these job openings. So this mismatch between the skills that young people acquire in schools and those needed by the companies that want to hire them is a pressing issue in the Western Balkans and Eastern Europe region. And when I speak when I refer to Eastern European region, I'm referring to the 6 countries of the Eastern Partnership. So let me share some reasons of this mismatch between supply and demand of skills. Let me share four reasons with you. Reason number 1, in many countries, the education system is detached from the real economy. So people go to school, but they are not taught the necessary skills to find a job. Reason number 2, the economy in the Western Balkans and South Caucasus in particular is composed of almost exclusively small and medium enterprises, so-called SMEs. So these SMEs across the region typically have a very low productivity, which means they do not have a high growth potential. So for the most medium and high skilled workers, the public sector actually remains the most attractive employer. So the public sector can pay relatively high wages and provides job security. So put simply, the smart people try to go to work for the government, which then in turn negatively affects the growth of the private sector. And often the expectations of young people regarding jobs, careers, salaries, and so on, they do not match what is being offered in the labor market, or they are simply unrealistic. So reason number 3, these regions have a history of emigration. If smart and productive people keep leaving, their skills are lacking in the market, which again impedes the growth of the private sector, and thus the development of the kind of attractive jobs, job opportunities that could have them kept there in their home countries. And finally, for those who stay, social security systems with generous benefits too often provide, and yet another reason why not to work in the formal economy. So you get paid anyway, and without the hassle of getting up early morning and go to the workplace or to a workshop. So in social security systems, I think it's very important to get the incentives right so that people have a reason to go to work. So maybe one last point. We've been speaking about the Western Balkans and the Eastern European region as a whole. But actually, the more and more I travel and the more I learn about the topic, I realize that the structure of youth unemployment and the particular reasons for this unemployment differs from one country to another in the region. So in the Western Balkans, for instance, these countries generally face a very high rate or high portion of the active population that is outside of the labor market. So the so-called inactivity rate is extremely high, much higher than in Eastern Europe, for instance. And just very recently, the European Training Foundation published a very interesting new study on how migration, human capital, and the labor market interact in the Western Balkans. And so I learned, for instance, that companies that want to expand, they're not only face a lack of labor, but also the lack of relevant skills among the available workers or unemployed people. And that seems to be especially the case in Bosnia-Herzegovina, while companies in Kosovo or Serbia seem to be much less affected by this issue. Or there are also interesting differences when it comes to brain drain in the region. So brain drain seems to be a particular significant issue in Albania, where about 40% of the total cumulative outflow from the country are the highly educated people. And in contrast, there is a net emigration of the highly educated people, the so-called brain gain. We can observe this in countries like Montenegro, Serbia, and North Macedonia.
Yeah, Katharina, thank you for giving us now this a really good overview of the situation with unemployment in the region. Now let's zoom in for a second. What's the reason so many young people in Albania are unemployed, Edlira?
Yes, I would follow what Katharina said. So the unemployment rate of youth in Albania is quite high. It's around 20%. These are official figures, and it's much higher if we look at the real figures. However, the overall tendency is decreasing because of the factor that also Katharina mentioned in her input, like migration, or also the narrowing, continuous narrowing of the age pyramid in Albania. But what is most concerning is the number of needs, not in education, employment, and training, which is quite high, it's around 30%. When it comes to the reasons, in fact, Katharina summarizes it very well. So all the reasons that was mentioned for the Balkan area are applied also in Albania, but they are strongly related to two key factors. The first one is quality jobs. If before, some years ago, we are talking about lack of jobs, now we are talking, or young people are looking for more qualitative jobs, which are related to, as was mentioned before, payments, wages, work conditions, work treatment, orientation, career orientation. So every young people who start jobs, they lack this information on how they can grow within a business. So these are all factors that are related to quality jobs. The second one is related to the lack of skills that we also was mentioned before by Katharina. So young people often lack the skills needed by the industry. And these reasons are closely related with an inability of the private sector to grow and to create qualitative jobs. So low awareness from one side and low of knowledge and to apply this, let's say, qualitative jobs and qualitative work environment, as well as the limited capacities and an ability to the private and public sector to offer quality training. So, and finally, I'll add another reason is also the very limited and not well functioning the career guidance orientation for young people. So these all three elements, I believe, contribute to an environment that makes the young people also leave the country and makes projects like us, development projects, to work and together with the key stakeholders, try to improve these functions.
Thank you, Adhira. And when we talk about jobs, usually the first issue that often gets the attention is the unemployment numbers. And while creating jobs is an important objective, of course, there are, however, two additional elements. Who gets the jobs and what kind of jobs? So it's more than unemployment numbers. And as you mentioned, Adhira, it's also about the quality. The International Labour Organization has long been promoting the decent work agenda. Steve, what makes a job a quality job?
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. Yeah, I mean, everybody's been counting jobs for a while, and it's a nice bird's eye view of what a project does and can give a nice perspective performance. Donors like to see it, they can report it back to government and parliaments. But yeah, whether they're inclusive or whether they're quality is, as you say, is another question. So yeah, in terms of quality, there are, I guess, various ways to look at job quality, but a way that we often look to ground it in is the ILO's decent work indicators, which set out a series of indicators for what makes up decent work. And part of that includes job quality. And so some of the elements that include job quality or that make up job quality are as you might expect, adequate earnings and productive employment, which I think a lot of projects grapple with. I mean, if you think about small scale agriculture, for example, they're just not earning enough. Most are not earning enough relative to the work they put in. Decent work hours is another one. So whether you're working too much or you're working too little. I mean, if you look at youth employment in Africa, it's really, unemployment is not so high. It's really the underemployment, which is the big issue there. So people just aren't working enough. And there's the ability to combine work, family, and personal life, which is really thinking about care, maternity leave. And there's work that should not be, we should not engage in or should be abolished, which we're talking about child labor or forced labor. And that's quite obvious, I think, but you often do see that in some contexts with children helping out the family or taking seasons off from school to work in a harvest. And stability and security at work, so having a regular contract. If you're a construction worker that's being hired for a day or two, you may not know where your pay is coming from beyond those 2 days or so. And equal opportunity and treatment in employment is another element, and that's really about gender pay gap, sort of the parity of gender in certain positions. And the last one I want to touch on is safe work environment. So being exposed to hazards. I mean, you can, as you might expect, mining or construction are very, I would say, risky in terms of occupational safety and health. But I mean, farming can be, if you're using chemical sprays, or if you're working in a factory with poor ventilation there, it's not a very safe work environment. So all that to say that there are a lot of pieces that make up job quality. So yeah, I will leave it there for now to keep the discussion.
No, thank you very much, Steve. And before I come back to you again, Katharina, can you kind of walk us through the work that Helvetas has been doing through its development initiatives in the Western Balkans and the Eastern European region?
Sure. So Helvetas promotes inclusive economic development in the region. But what does inclusive mean? It means a sustainable kind of economic growth that is distributed fairly across the society and that creates job opportunities or opportunities for all, especially for the vulnerable, for those who are the most vulnerable ones, and these are often women and young people. I just returned from Armenia and Georgia, where I assessed the different pilot projects of the RECONOMY program. And let me give you some examples that I just came across last week. So in Georgia, an input provider trains students of a vocational school on how to install windows in an energy efficient manner. And the provider also certifies the young trainees. So that does not only increase the skills of the trainees and prepares the future workforce in this promising field, but I think it also raises the general awareness in Georgia on how energy can be saved when the right windows are installed properly. So this is good for jobs that match the labor market needs, but it's also good for economic growth and also for the climate. Then I visited a project in Armenia where more than 1,100 people, 70% of them being women, were trained in different short-term trainings ranging from cheese making to how to become a tour guide. And it is the industry itself, so for instance, the Armenian Hiking Association, that organizes these trainings. But as Edlira said before, often training alone is not sufficient to bring young people into the labor market. We are therefore also working on career guidance, for instance, by Reselbinia in Albania, or in the I project in Kosovo, where the project together with the state agency and the municipalities has introduced a school-based career center model that is now fully operational in 15 municipalities. And I want to share one last example that I came across last week that shows yet another dimension of the type of work that we do, namely how businesses can deal with bureaucracy. So in Ukraine and Moldova, our partner has supported various business organizations to use a tool that measures the impact of a particular regulation on businesses, and a tool that calculates the costs of businesses to implement this particular regulation. So this calculation then serves as evidence for advocacy towards the local or national government to change or abandon this regulation, which in turn for the businesses translates into saving money. And to put it in more general terms, so Helvetas aims to promote three things. Number one is decent work. So Helvetas strives to promote job opportunities for men and women that are decent, as just defined by Steve. Then number two, future of work. So we want to make sure that policymakers, organizations, and workers are ready for the transformations that are taking place in the world of work right now, for instance, with regard to digitalization. So individuals, companies, but also organizations need to be prepared for the new demands of the labor market of the future. So we do this by fostering development of skills, but also the capacity of the private sector, and we work on framework conditions. And last point, number 3, green economic development. So Helvetas promotes growth in employment and income driven by public and private investment into economic activities, infrastructure and assets that help to reduce carbon emissions and pollution, that enhances energy and resource efficiency and reduces the loss of biodiversity and ecosystem services. So in short, we aim for decent work, getting ready for the future of work and a greener economy.
Thank you, Katharina. Elvira, you work for the Reselbinia project, now zooming in, the project of the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, which is implemented by Helvetas in Albania. You applied the inclusive systems approach, just like the regional program RECONOMY. Can you kind of walk us through the work that Reselbinia has been doing to tackle the youth unemployment in the country?
Yes, RISI, as I previously mentioned, RISI is tackling 3 main dimensions of the labor market. The first one is the demand dimension of the labor market. There we work with the private sector and public sector as well to facilitate growth in the private sector with the intention to create quality jobs. This is achieved through working in potential and attractive sectors for growth and attractive for young people, as well as by introducing innovative business models that could be embraced by the whole sector. For example, I can bring here, let's say, introduction of standards for accessing high-value market in the agribusiness sector. And these are standards that have also the component of quality jobs into their system. Or the public and private partnerships for promoting sustainable tourism, or creating an enabling environment for cybersecurity and data protection, which are aspects very actual in the times we are living. So these are, how to say, examples of the way how we introduce change, but then we strongly promote them in order to be scale up and then to take ownership by the key stakeholders that play that function in the system. The second dimension is the dimension of the supply. So we mentioned before that one of the reasons why young people are unemployed is the lack of adequate skills. So, and there we work both with private training providers, how they can offer attractive and market-oriented trainings, as well as we support coordination among public and private education institutions and private sector, the industry, to reflect the latest industry development in the education and training curricula with the so-called, I don't know how familiar you are with the so-called term of sector skill committees. These are platforms that bring together industry and education institutions to reflect the adaptations that professions are needed to be done, but also new professions that are emerging. And last but not least, we also work in the area of intermediation and career guidance, which match demand and supply. And here again, by enabling public and private institutions, intermediaries for more effective and digitalized services. We have to accept we are living now in a digital times, and we have to think of innovation on access to service in a digital way as well. And also by activating all functions of the career guidance service provision, both at public and private level. Recently, yesterday and today, we are having in Tirana for the first time the profession fair with the intention to raise awareness for career guidance. So everybody talk about career guidance, but very few people have a good understanding of it. So we want young people and their parents and institutions as well to have a better clarity on this service, on this function, and then support and work together with them to improve them. To improve the service. So RISI is working for many years in this domain, and we are having a level approach, how to say, working with different institutions, working at the source of the provision of the service, working at content, but also at awareness, so promotion and awareness.
Thank you, Elvira. And Steve, back to you now. Most of the indicators of job quality are tangible, like pay. Others are more subjective, like a job as the worker experiences it, or whether a job meets the worker's preferences. Do you think job quality is a continuum as much it is a goal? Is there a metric to measure it, really?
Yeah, okay, thanks for the question, and thought-provoking. So I think on your first question, whether job quality is a continuum, as much as it is a goal, I would agree with that. I think, look, we need to strive for good quality jobs in our projects. We need to have a North Star that guides us to what we want. However, practically speaking, if I think about a small scale farmer, the elements of job quality that I listed out before, that farmer will not have any of them. So from a project perspective, I think it's highly unrealistic to think that we can create a good quality job for that person. So what I think that at least my team is doing, or the people that work with and sort of the project space that I do, is that we're really trying to focus on the one or two elements of job quality that we think, one, are very important to the worker, and then two, we think that the project can actually do something about. So that we kind of narrow the focus to really try to have some meaningful impact, but then puts this worker on a continuum or a pathway to a better quality job. Now, on your second question about how do we measure it, or is there a metric to measure it? And I wish it was that easy. And I think, yeah, lots of people have struggled with this. We've struggled with it ourselves. We've tried to tackle it over a number of years, but practically speaking, again, if we think about the various elements that I talked about, if I just take one of them, which is, say, occupational safety and health, and I look at a construction worker, I look at a small scale farmer, and I look at a factory worker, how you would measure safety and health in each of those particular contexts is completely different. And so you would need different metrics to measure just one element. And so then if you look at the whole range of job quality, it just means, and the different contexts, it's quite difficult to get a consistent metric that would say, this is a good job, good quality job or a bad quality job. So what we've tried to do is point projects in the direction of, we've developed like a database of a toolkit of measurement indicators for job quality. And we've also identified created a guide in terms of how to measure job quality. But that measurement guidance is focused again on being slightly pragmatic about focusing on one or two or three issues that you think that the project is really trying to move the needle, setting up some metrics and trying to measure an improvement in the job, because it's still going to be difficult to say that a factory institutes a new safety prevention policy. Does that mean that there's actually that the jobs are safer now? I don't know, but it is at least an indicator that something's moving in the right direction. So we then try to measure through a series of indicators, as that job, the quality improved in the areas that we're really focused on driving change. And so yeah, it's not a clear answer for you, but it's not an easy issue.
And despite the frightening figures of unemployment, a closer look at the figures around the world shows that more people than ever are in work. It's also true that there are more jobs than people out of work or seeking employment. This trend is expected to shift with a changing nature of the world of work. New models of employment are on the rise, like part-time or temporary, and at the same time, informal and unpaid family work is spreading. Steve, why do you think we should care more about the quality of jobs?
Yeah, you're right. The whole world of work is changing before our eyes. I don't think we pretend to understand exactly what the impacts are going to be on job quality just yet. Particularly, I mean, you look at various regions, like the regions that the Western Balkans or Eastern Europe is completely different from Africa. But on your question about why should we care about good quality jobs, yeah, jobs are a critical pathway out of poverty for most people, you know? And research shows that if you have a low quality job, this is precisely what keeps people in poverty. So, I mean, if you don't make enough money, you stay in poverty. If you don't work enough hours, you stay in poverty. If you get hurt in a job and you're incapacitated, you can't work, you stay in poverty. If your child goes to work or is working and doesn't go to school, that child is not going to advance from an educational attainment perspective, and will stay in poverty, likely. I mean, this is all likely, of course, but not to paint a real downer of a picture here, but I mean, it is something we should care about and think about, and we really need to focus on some of these issues to, again, put these people on the pathway to better quality jobs and hopefully get them on the pathway.
Thank you, Steve. Edvira, what are your thoughts? Why should we care about the quality of jobs?
Yeah, as I mentioned in my speech in the beginning, so nowadays we are talking, young people are talking about quality jobs rather than lack of jobs. And that is related more due to the new trends. We are having digitalization, we are talking about green or circular economy, or we are working on upskilling and reskilling. So these are the trends. And I think the young people are the one who have better understood this. The problem is with the system, how the system is reacting to this. I think in RECI, we try to address it in three main aspects or directions. The first one, as mentioned by Steve before, is like understanding the context we are working. I think this is something we do always in our work, but now we have to do it more and more because the change is the only thing that change. So the change is the only thing that is constant. So like the change will be there forever. So, and understanding the context we are working, so for us mean like, what does it mean a decent or quality job in Albania? And how its aspects are perceived and applied by both employees and employer. So I completely agree with what Steve mentioned before. So we can't expect a farmer having a full decent job. So we need to understand what are these one or two key elements important for the farmer that will make his or her life better, his work better. So for example, 2 days ago, I was in the field work, and there I met a young guy working for a medical aromatic plants business. He has studied in Sweden, but he decided to stay in that area, which is a remote area in Albania. It's not Tirana. And where I was asking him, so what was his, let's say, motivation to stay? He mentioned that he felt like important. He was treated important in the business. So he has his small own office. He was also driving the tractors. He was doing also kind of agriculture work. But at the end of the day, he had some good conditions, some respect for his work. He was feeling appreciated and important. So these may be also small elements that make a job, a quality job, a decent job. So, and there, for example, we also recently did a quick survey in the BPO sector, business process outsourcing industry, to see how business is thinking and is reacting to such aspects of work. And we found out that there is a tendency, let's say, business are open to change. They want to invest. They are ready to cooperate to change small things, maybe not everything from the very start, but step by step. Or we are initiating also in the process of a more in-depth survey with some ILO expert to understand more the gaps, the main gaps of quality jobs in Albania in the three sectors RECI is working in: agribusiness, tourism, and ICT, with the intention exactly to identify those important elements that can be changed, that are feasible and are, institutions and business can embrace. And that could bring a change for the business because they will have also low staff fluctuation, but also for the people who work because they will enjoy better their work. So this is one element that we care in our work, and I think we should do it more and more in the future. The second is related to the selection of our partners. When we want to bring a change, be it in one sector, agribusiness or tourism, we normally work with one or two partners in the beginning. We pilot this change. And there we are very careful to select partners that are known as businesses or institutions that apply such principles, because once this piloting is finished, we promote, and the promotion includes also aspects of quality jobs and decent jobs. And third, introducing innovation in our work to support business to grow and to introduce new models for business growth. We often bring also solutions that they have embedded aspects of quality jobs or standards in the work environment. For example, I mentioned before accessing high-value market by introducing standards. We are talking here about global gap standards to sell fruits and vegetables in European markets with a higher price, which are beneficial not only for exporters, but also for farmers, because they'll get more money. And if while exporters apply such standards, which starts in the whole value chain from farmer to the exporter line, so they are applying also principles of decent jobs. So they are, for example, for the farmers, they have to offer a place where they can eat lunch, they can offer toilets, they can offer clothes for safety and security. So these are embedded in the standards. So, and by this, also the business, if it's not aware enough, they are educated by working, by introducing a change which will bring more money for them. They also grow in educating themselves in having being more careful about quality jobs and decent work.
Thank you very much, Edlira. So considering the pandemic, the effects of you, Katharina, explained very well in episode 7, it seems we need to prepare the workforce with the skills needed to future-proof their careers against expected displacement of millions of jobs and skills as a result of technological change. This also means that new roles will be needed to be filled that will be created by the so-called fourth industrial revolution, shifts in the global economy and industrial transitions towards sustainability. So, all in all, the best way forward is to foster a more cohesive and inclusive society to provide everybody with a decent job. Well, thank you so much, Katharina, Steve, and Edlira, for taking the time to come and talk on this episode. This has been a really great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much, everybody.
Yes, of course. Thank you.
And for all the viewers out there and those listening to us, stay tuned. More interesting topics are coming up. This was Sabin, your podcast host.